Lucy Martinez sat in the big airport chair, her small legs swinging back and forth. She was only 8 years old, but she looked even smaller next to her huge German shepherd dog named Bruno. Bruno was not just any dog. He was Lucy's best friend and her lifesaver. The dog wore a bright blue vest that said "Service Dog" in big white letters. People walking by in the busy airport kept looking at them. Some smiled, but others seemed worried or confused. Lucy did not notice the stares. She was too busy talking to Bruno about their big adventure. "We are going on an airplane today, Bruno," Lucy whispered to her dog. "Grandma Helen says it will be fun, but I am a little scared. Will you stay with me the whole time?" Bruno looked up at Lucy with his kind brown eyes. His tail wagged slowly and he moved closer to her chair. The big dog always seemed to know when Lucy needed comfort. Helen Carter, Lucy's grandmother, sat next to them holding their plane tickets. She checked the papers for what felt like the 100th time. Helen was worried, but she tried not to show it. This trip was very important for Lucy. Lucy had been sick since she was a baby. She had something called epilepsy, which meant her brain sometimes did not work right. When this happened, Lucy would have seizures. During a seizure, her whole body would shake, and she could not control it. These seizures were scary and dangerous. 2 years ago, Lucy's family got Bruno from a special training school. Bruno was taught to help people with epilepsy. He could smell when Lucy was about to have a seizure, sometimes 20 minutes before it happened. This early warning was very important because it gave Lucy and her family time to get ready and keep her safe. Bruno never left Lucy's side. He went to school with her, slept in her bedroom, and even went to the grocery store with her family. The law said that service dogs like Bruno could go anywhere their owners needed to go. This included airplanes. Today they were flying from Denver to Atlanta. In Atlanta, there were special doctors who might be able to help Lucy feel better. Her grandmother had saved money for months to make this trip happen. "Flight 447 to Atlanta is now boarding," a voice said over the airport speakers. Helen stood up and gathered their bags. "Come on, Lucy. It is time to get on the airplane." Lucy felt her stomach flip with nervous excitement. She had never been on an airplane before. Bruno seemed to sense her feelings and pressed closer to her side as they walked toward the gate. The airport was very busy. People rushed around with suitcases and bags. Children cried, and adults talked loudly on their phones. The noise and movement made Lucy feel dizzy. Sometimes too much excitement could trigger one of her seizures. Bruno noticed right away. The smart dog moved to walk directly in front of Lucy, creating a calm space around her. He had been trained to do this when Lucy felt overwhelmed. As they got closer to the airplane gate, more people stared at Bruno. A man in a business suit looked annoyed when he saw the big dog. A woman with a small child pulled her daughter away when Bruno walked past. Helen noticed these reactions and felt her worry grow. "Excuse me," said a gate agent named Amy Parker. "Is that a service animal?" Helen nodded and showed Amy their paperwork. "Yes, Bruno is Lucy's seizure alert dog. We have all the proper documents." Amy looked at the papers carefully. Everything was correct and legal. "No problem," she said with a smile. "You can board early if you would like. Sometimes it is easier for service dog teams to get settled before the plane gets crowded." This made Helen feel a little better. At least some people understood and wanted to help. They walked down the long hallway that led to the airplane. Lucy had never seen anything like it. The hallway was like a tunnel that connected the airport to the plane. Through the windows, she could see the big airplane waiting for them. "Look, Bruno," Lucy said, pointing out the window. "That big thing is going to fly us through the sky." Bruno wagged his tail. He had been on airplanes before during his training, but this was Lucy's first flight. When they reached the airplane door, a flight attendant named Karen Mills greeted them. She was a kind woman with gray hair and a warm smile. "Welcome aboard," Karen said. "You must be Lucy. I heard we have a very special passenger today." Lucy smiled shyly. She was not used to being called special by strangers. Karen knelt down to Bruno's level. "And this must be Bruno. What a handsome and well-behaved dog you are." Bruno sat perfectly still, just like he had been trained to do. Service dogs were taught not to get excited or distracted when they were working. Their seats were in the middle of the airplane. Helen had chosen these seats carefully. They were not too close to the front where important business people sat, but not too far back, where it might be bumpy. Bruno would have enough room to lie down next to Lucy's seat. As they walked down the narrow aisle, Lucy noticed more people staring. Some looked curious, others seemed annoyed. One older man shook his head and muttered something about dogs not belonging on airplanes. Lucy started to feel worried again. She did not like it when people seemed upset about Bruno. Bruno was a good dog. He was just trying to help her stay healthy and safe. "It is okay, sweetie," Helen whispered to Lucy. "Bruno has every right to be here. The law protects service dogs and the people who need them." They found their seats and began to get settled. Bruno lay down on the floor next to Lucy, taking up very little space. He was a big dog, but he had been trained to make himself as small as possible in tight spaces. Lucy looked around the airplane with wide eyes. It was like being inside a long, narrow room with tiny windows. The seats were covered in blue fabric and there were small screens on the back of each seat. More passengers continued to board the plane. Most people walked by without any problems, but Lucy noticed that a few seemed bothered by Bruno's presence. One man in an expensive suit stopped at their row and stared at Bruno with an angry expression. This man was Frank Cooper, and he was not happy about sharing his flight with a large dog. Frank believed that animals did not belong on airplanes no matter what kind of training they had. He had paid a lot of money for his first-class seat, and he expected a comfortable, animal-free flight. Frank walked up to the front of the plane to talk to the flight attendants. Lucy could not hear what he was saying, but she could tell he was upset about something. Helen noticed too and felt her worry return. "Do not worry about that man," Helen told Lucy. "Bruno is allowed to be here. We have all the right papers and the airline knows about service dogs." Lucy nodded, but she still felt nervous. She reached down to pet Bruno's soft fur. The dog always made her feel better when she was scared or worried. As more people found their seats, the airplane began to feel crowded and noisy. Lucy's excitement was mixing with anxiety, creating the kind of stress that sometimes led to seizures. Bruno lifted his head and looked at Lucy carefully. His nose twitched as he smelled the air around her. The plane was almost ready to take off, but Lucy had no idea that their journey was about to become much more complicated than anyone had planned. The airplane lifted off the ground with a loud roar. Lucy pressed her face to the small window and watched as the buildings below got smaller and smaller. Her heart was beating fast, but Bruno stayed calm beside her, which helped her feel better. "Look, Bruno," Lucy whispered. "The cars look like tiny toys from up here." Bruno raised his head slightly but kept his focus on Lucy. He could sense that she was excited but also nervous. This combination of feelings was something he had learned to watch carefully. The airplane climbed higher into the sky. After about 30 minutes, the captain turned off the seatbelt sign. People began to move around the cabin, going to the bathroom or stretching their legs. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. But up in the front of the airplane, trouble was starting. Frank Cooper had been watching Lucy and Bruno from his first-class seat. The more he thought about the big dog, the angrier he became. Frank was a wealthy businessman who was used to getting his way. He paid a lot of money to fly first class, and he did not think he should have to share his flight with any animals. "Frank," called the flight attendant over to his seat. Karen Mills walked up to him with a polite smile. "How can I help you, sir?" Karen asked. Frank pointed toward the middle of the airplane where Lucy and Bruno were sitting. "I want that dog removed from this flight immediately," he said in a loud voice. Karen looked confused. "Sir, that is a service dog. The little girl needs him for medical reasons. He is allowed to be on the airplane." Frank's face turned red with anger. "I do not care what kind of dog he is. I am allergic to dogs, and that animal is too big to be on an airplane. I paid good money for this ticket, and I expect a comfortable flight." Karen tried to explain the rules about service animals, but Frank would not listen. He raised his voice even louder. "If you do not remove that dog right now, I will sue this airline for everything it is worth. I know lawyers, and I know my rights, as a paying customer." Other first-class passengers began to stare as Frank's voice got louder and angrier. Karen felt embarrassed and did not know what to do. She had worked for the airline for 15 years, but she had never dealt with such an angry complaint about a service dog. "Let me talk to the captain," Karen said quietly. She hoped that Captain Richard Stone would know how to handle this situation. Karen walked to the front of the airplane and knocked on the cockpit door. Captain Stone opened it and looked out. "What is the problem?" he asked. Karen explained about Frank's complaint. She told the captain that the passenger was very angry and threatening to sue the airline. Captain Stone listened but did not really understand the laws about service animals. He had been flying for 20 years, but most of his experience was with regular pets, not working service dogs. "How big is this dog?" Captain Stone asked. "He is a German Shepherd, so he is fairly large, but he is very well behaved and has all the proper paperwork," Karen explained. Captain Stone thought about the situation. He was worried about the angry passenger in first class. Frank Cooper looked like an important businessman, and the captain did not want him to complain to the airline's management. Captain Stone also worried that if Frank really was allergic to dogs, there could be medical problems during the flight. "We cannot have passengers getting sick or filing lawsuits," Captain Stone said. "Tell the family that we will make an emergency landing in Kansas City. They can get off there and find another way to travel." Karen's eyes went wide. "Captain, I do not think we can do that. Service dogs are protected by federal law. The dog is not causing any problems." But Captain Stone had already made up his mind. "I am the captain of this aircraft, and I make the decisions about passenger safety. Tell them we are landing in Kansas City." Karen felt sick to her stomach. She knew this was wrong, but she had to follow the captain's orders. She walked slowly back through the airplane toward Lucy and Helen. Helen noticed Karen coming and could tell something was wrong. The flight attendant's face looked worried and upset. "Excuse me, Mrs. Carter," Karen said quietly when she reached their row. "I need to speak with you about your dog." Helen felt her heart sink. "Is there a problem?" Karen looked around to make sure other passengers could not hear. "The captain has decided that we need to make an emergency landing in Kansas City. He wants you and your granddaughter to get off the plane there." Helen could not believe what she was hearing. "What? Why? Bruno is a legal service animal. We have all the proper documentation." "I know," Karen said sadly. "But there was a complaint from another passenger. The captain is concerned about safety." Helen's voice started to get louder. "Safety? Bruno is trained to keep Lucy safe. Without him, she could have a seizure with no warning. That is what is dangerous." Other passengers began to notice the conversation. Lucy looked up from her coloring book and saw that her grandmother looked upset. "What is wrong, Grandma Helen?" Lucy asked. Helen tried to stay calm for Lucy's sake, but inside she was panicking. "The airplane people want Bruno to get off the plane, sweetie." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "But Bruno has to stay with me. He keeps me safe." Bruno sensed the stress and anxiety coming from both Lucy and Helen. He sat up straighter and moved closer to Lucy's legs. His training told him that something was wrong. "Please," Helen begged Karen. "You do not understand. Lucy has severe epilepsy. Bruno can detect her seizures before they happen. Without him, she could be seriously hurt." Karen felt terrible. She knew this was wrong, but she did not know how to change the captain's mind. "I am sorry," she whispered. "The captain has made his decision." Helen stood up in the aisle. Her voice was loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is illegal. You cannot remove a service animal from a flight. Bruno is not just a pet. He is medical equipment that keeps my granddaughter alive." People in the surrounding seats began to listen to what was happening. Some looked confused. Others seemed concerned. A few passengers started taking out their phones to record what was going on. Lucy began to cry softly. The stress and fear were building up inside her, which was exactly the kind of situation that could trigger a seizure. Bruno immediately noticed the change in Lucy's behavior and body chemistry. He moved to position himself right next to her seat, ready to alert if he detected the early signs of an episode. "Look," Helen said to Karen, pointing at Bruno. "Do you see how he is acting? He is already starting to monitor Lucy because she is getting upset. This is exactly why she needs him." Frank Cooper, who had been watching from his first-class seat, stood up and walked back toward the commotion. "Is there a problem with removing that animal?" he asked loudly. Helen turned to face him. "Yes, there is a big problem. This dog saves my granddaughter's life. She has epilepsy, and he warns us before she has seizures." Frank crossed his arms. "That is not my problem. I paid for a comfortable flight without animals. If you cannot control your medical issues, maybe you should not be flying." Several passengers gasped at Frank's cruel words. An older woman in the seat across the aisle shook her head in disgust. A young father holding his own daughter looked angry at Frank's lack of compassion. Helen felt desperate. She could see that. Lucy was getting more upset by the minute, and Bruno was showing signs that he was detecting the early stages of a possible seizure. The stress of the situation was creating exactly the kind of medical emergency that Bruno was trained to prevent. "Please," Helen said one more time to Karen. "Just let us continue to Atlanta. Bruno will not bother anyone. He just needs to stay with Lucy to keep her safe." But Karen shook her head sadly. She had to follow the captain's orders, even though she knew they were wrong. "I am sorry. The captain has already contacted Kansas City Airport. We will be landing in 20 minutes. As the airplane began to descend toward Kansas City, Helen realized that their important medical trip was falling apart. Lucy continued to cry quietly, and Bruno remained on high alert, ready to protect his young partner from the seizure that stress and fear were threatening to bring on. The situation was getting worse by the minute, and Helen had no idea how to fix it. Dr. Amanda Ross had been listening to the argument from her seat 3 rows behind Lucy and Helen. She was a pediatric neurologist, which meant she was a doctor who specialized in brain problems in children. She was returning home from a medical conference where she had learned about the latest treatments for epilepsy. When she heard Helen mention that Lucy had severe epilepsy and that Bruno was a seizure-alert dog, Dr. Ross knew she had to help. She had worked with many children like Lucy, and she understood exactly how important service dogs were for keeping them safe. Dr. Ross unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a medical bag that she always took with her when she traveled. "Excuse me," Dr. Ross said as she approached Helen and Lucy. "I could not help but overhear your conversation. I am Dr. Amanda Ross, and I specialize in treating children with epilepsy." Helen looked up with hope in her eyes. "You are a doctor?" "Yes," Dr. Ross said gently. "I work at Children's Hospital in Chicago. Can you tell me about Lucy's condition?" Helen quickly explained that Lucy had been having seizures since she was 2 years old. The seizures were unpredictable and dangerous. Sometimes Lucy would fall and hurt herself. Other times, the seizures lasted so long that she had to go to the emergency room. "Bruno has been with us for 2 years, Helen said, pointing to the German Shepherd. "He can smell when Lucy is about to have a seizure, sometimes 20 minutes before it happens. This gives us time to get Lucy somewhere safe and give her medicine if she needs it." Dr. Ross nodded. She had seen seizure-alert dogs work before, and she knew they could be life-saving for children with severe epilepsy. As they talked, Dr. Ross noticed that Lucy was showing signs of stress that could trigger a seizure. The little girl was breathing fast. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she kept looking around nervously. These were all warning signs that Dr. Ross recognized from her years of treating epilepsy patients. Bruno noticed the changes in Lucy, too. The smart dog moved closer to his young partner and began displaying subtle behaviors that showed he was detecting chemical changes in Lucy's body. He sniffed the air near Lucy more frequently, and his posture became more alert and focused. Dr. Ross quickly took out her phone and started recording Bruno's behavior. She knew this evidence would be important for what she was about to do. "Look," Dr. Ross said to Helen, showing her the phone screen. "Bruno is already alerting. He can sense that Lucy is getting close to having a seizure because of all this stress and fear." Just as Dr. Ross predicted, Bruno moved into his full alert position. He sat directly in front of Lucy and placed his head on her lap. This was his signal that a seizure was likely to happen soon. Helen immediately reached into her bag and pulled out Lucy's emergency medication. Dr. Ross helped position Lucy in her seat so she would be safe if the seizure occurred. "See how important," He is? Helen said to Karen, the flight attendant, who was still standing nearby looking worried. Dr. Ross stood up and looked directly at Karen. I need to speak with your captain immediately. What he is planning to do is not only illegal, it is medically dangerous. Karen hesitated. The captain is very busy preparing for the emergency landing. This is a medical emergency, Dr. Ross said firmly. I am a licensed physician, and I am telling you that removing this service dog could put this child's life at risk. Get me to that cockpit now. The authority in Dr. Ross's voice made Karen realize this was serious. She led Dr. Ross to the front of the airplane and knocked on the cockpit door. Captain Stone opened the door and looked annoyed. What now? Captain, this is Dr. Amanda Ross. She is a pediatric neurologist, and she needs to speak with you about the service dog situation, Karen explained. Dr. Ross did not wait for an invitation. She stepped forward and looked Captain Stone directly in the eyes. Captain, I need to inform you that what you are planning to do violates federal law. The Americans with Disabilities Act clearly states that service animals cannot be removed from flights unless they pose a direct threat to safety. This dog poses no threat. In fact, he is preventing a medical emergency. Captain Stone looked uncomfortable. We have a passenger complaint about allergies and the size of the animal. Allergies do not override disability rights, Dr. Ross said, firmly. And size is not a legal reason to remove a service animal. That dog is trained medical equipment just like a wheelchair or an oxygen tank. You cannot remove medical equipment from a patient. Dr. Ross pulled out her phone and showed Captain Stone the video she had just recorded. This footage shows the dog detecting an oncoming seizure. Without his warning, that little girl could have a seizure with no preparation, which could cause serious injury or even death. Captain Stone watched the video and began to realize he might have made a mistake. He had never seen a service dog actually working before, and he was surprised by how sophisticated Bruno's behavior was. Furthermore, Dr. Ross continued, if you force this family off the plane, you will be discriminating against a disabled child. The legal consequences for the airline could be severe. Not to mention the negative publicity when this story reaches the news. While Dr. Ross was talking to the captain, something else was happening in the main cabin. Other passengers had started to understand what was going on, and many of them were getting angry about the unfair treatment of Lucy and her family. Tony Garcia, a military veteran who was sitting near the back of the plane, stood up and walked toward the front. Tony had his own service dog at home, a small beagle who helped him with PTSD after his time in the Army. He understood exactly what Lucy and her family were going through. Excuse me, Tony said loudly enough for many passengers to hear. I could not help but notice what is happening here. I am a veteran and I have a service dog too. What this airline is trying to do is completely wrong and illegal. Several other passengers began to nod in agreement. A woman named Lisa Park, who worked as a teacher, had a disabled sister who used a service dog. She also stood up to support Lucy's family. That little girl has done nothing wrong, Lisa said. Her dog is not bothering anyone. He is just doing his job, which is keeping her safe. Even some of the first-class passengers were starting to turn against Frank Cooper. An elderly couple named Robert and Mary Johnson looked at Frank with disgust. You should be ashamed of yourself, Mary Johnson said to Frank. That is just a little girl who needs her dog to stay healthy. Frank Cooper began to realize that he was not getting the support he expected. Instead of other passengers agreeing with him, they were angry at him for trying to hurt a disabled child. Back in the cockpit, Dr. Ross was not finished making her case to Captain Stone. Let me be very clear about something, she said. I am going to be a witness to whatever happens here today. If you force this family off the plane, I will make sure the story gets told. I know reporters, I know lawyers, and I know other doctors who will be very interested in how an airline treated a disabled child. Captain Stone was beginning to sweat. This situation had gotten much more complicated than he had expected. He had thought he was just dealing with a complaint about a pet, but now he realized he was facing potential legal trouble and bad publicity. Dr. Ross could see that the captain was starting to change his mind. Captain, you still have time to do the right thing. Cancel the emergency landing and let this family continue to their destination. The little girl is traveling to see specialists who might be able to help her condition. Do not let one selfish passenger ruin her chance at getting better medical care. Captain Stone looked out at the main cabin where he could see passengers standing and talking animatedly. It was clear that most people supported Lucy and her family, not Frank Cooper. What about the passenger who complained? Captain Stone asked. One person's discomfort does not override another person's civil rights, Dr. Ross said simply, especially when that person is a child with a serious medical condition. As Captain Stone considered his options, Bruno's alert behavior was proving Dr. Ross's point. The dog remained focused on Lucy, ready to help her through whatever medical crisis the stress might trigger. His presence was not just comforting, it was medically necessary. The captain realized he had a choice to make, and the wrong choice could have serious consequences for everyone involved. Captain Stone stood in the cockpit doorway looking out at his airplane. He could see passengers standing in the aisles, and many of them looked upset. He had been flying for 20 years, but he had never seen passengers get this angry about his decisions. Dr. Ross waited patiently for the captain to speak. She could see that he was thinking hard about what to do next. Behind her, she could hear more passengers joining the conversation about Lucy and Bruno. Captain, Dr. Ross said quietly, I know you want to do the right thing. You became a pilot to help people get safely to their destinations. That little girl is trying to get to doctors who might be able to help her. Please do not let one selfish passenger stop her from getting the medical care she needs. Captain Stone looked back at Dr. Ross. You really think I could get in legal trouble for this? I do not think it, Captain. I know it, Dr. Ross replied. The Americans with Disabilities Act has very clear rules about service animals. Airlines cannot remove them unless they are actually dangerous or disruptive. This dog has been perfectly behaved. While they talked, Tony Garcia, the military veteran, was speaking to other passengers in the main cabin. His voice was loud enough for people several rows away to hear. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan, Tony said. When I came home, I had nightmares and panic attacks. My service dog helped save my life. These animals are not pets. They are medical equipment that keeps people alive and healthy. Lisa Park, the teacher whose sister had a disability, nodded in agreement. My sister has been using a service dog for 5 years. Before she got her dog, she was afraid to leave the house. Now she can work and live a normal life. These dogs are heroes. An older man named Jim Walsh, who was sitting in the aisle seat, stood up and faced the other passengers. I am a retired lawyer, he said. What this airline is trying to do is illegal discrimination. If they force that family off this plane, they will be breaking federal law. The passengers were getting more upset by the minute. Several people had started taking videos with their phones. They wanted to record what was happening in case they needed to show it to reporters or lawyers later. Frank Cooper, the businessman who had started all the trouble, was still sitting in his first-class seat. But now he was starting to feel very uncomfortable. The other first-class passengers were looking at him with angry expressions. Robert Johnson, the elderly man sitting across from Frank, leaned over and spoke in a stern voice. Young man, you should be ashamed of yourself. That little girl did nothing wrong. Her dog is not bothering anyone. Mary Johnson, Robert's wife, shook her head sadly. We have 5 grandchildren. If one of them needed a service dog, we would want people to be kind and understanding, not cruel like you are being. Even the flight attendants were starting to turn against Frank's complaint. Karen Mills had been working for the airline for 15 years, and she had seen many service animals on flights. Bruno was one of the best-behaved dogs she had ever encountered. Karen walked back to the cockpit where Dr. Ross was still talking, to Captain Stone. Captain, Karen said, I need to tell you something. I have been watching that dog for the entire flight. He has not barked, he has not moved around, and he has not bothered any other passengers. He is just lying quietly next to the little girl, exactly like he is supposed to do. Captain Stone listened to Karen's report. He trusted her judgment because she had been with the airline for so long and had dealt with many difficult situations. Doctor, Ross pulled out her phone again and showed Captain Stone some information she had looked up. Captain, let me read you the exact law about service animals on airplanes. It says that airlines cannot charge extra fees for service animals, cannot make them sit in cargo, and cannot remove them unless they pose a direct threat to health and safety. She scrolled down to another section. It also says that other passengers, allergies or fear of dogs are not valid reasons to remove a service animal. The only exceptions are if the dog is aggressive or if it is not house-trained. Captain Stone read the information on Dr. Ross's phone. He was starting to realize that he had made a big mistake. He had acted too quickly without understanding the law. "What about the passenger who complained?" Captain Stone asked. "He said he would sue the airline." Dr. Ross smiled slightly. "Captain, which lawsuit do you think would be worse? One angry businessman suing because he had to sit near a well-behaved service dog, or a disabled child suing because she was illegally discriminated against? Plus, that businessman does not have a legal case. Discomfort is not the same as a real health emergency." Back in the main cabin, more passengers were learning about Lucy's situation and becoming supportive. A young mother named Patricia Lee was traveling with her own daughter, who was about Lucy's age. Patricia walked over to Lucy's seat and knelt down so she could talk to the little girl at eye level. "Hi, Lucy," Patricia said gently. "My name is Patricia, and this is my daughter Emma. We think Bruno is a very special dog." Lucy looked up with tears still in her eyes. "Some people want Bruno to get off the airplane, but he has to stay with me or I might get hurt." Emma, Patricia's daughter, reached out to pet Bruno gently. "He is so soft and nice. Why would anyone want him to leave?" Patricia looked at Helen with sympathy. "As a mother, I cannot imagine how scared you must be. Please know that most of the people on this airplane support you and want to help." Meanwhile, Frank Cooper was becoming more and more isolated. The passengers around him were making it clear that they disagreed with his complaint. A businessman named Alex Turner, who was sitting 2 seats away from Frank, finally spoke up. "You know what?" Alex said to Frank. "I fly a lot for work, and I have seen many service animals on planes. They are always well-trained and well-behaved. You are making a big deal out of nothing." Frank tried to defend himself. "I have allergies, and that dog is too big for an airplane seat." Alex shook his head. "If you really had serious allergies, you would have mentioned it when you bought your ticket. The airline could have seated you away from service animals. And that dog is not in a seat. He is lying on the floor exactly where he is supposed to be." Dr. Ross could see that Captain Stone was running out of reasons to continue with the emergency landing. She decided to make one final point. "Captain, let me ask you something. If your own child or grandchild had epilepsy and needed a service dog, how would you want them to be treated on an airplane?" Captain Stone thought about his own 8-year-old grandson, Tommy. He imagined Tommy in Lucy's situation, scared and crying because adults were trying to take away his medical support. The thought made Captain Stone feel sick to his stomach. "You are right," Captain Stone said quietly. "I made a mistake. I acted too fast without thinking about what was really happening." Dr. Ross nodded. "It is not too late to fix this, Captain. You can still do the right thing." Captain Stone looked out at the passengers one more time. He could see Lucy sitting with Bruno, and he could see how calm and protective the dog was with her. He thought about all the flights he had taken his own family on, and how he would feel if someone tried to separate him from his children during a medical emergency. "Karen," Captain Stone said to the flight attendant, "please make an announcement. Tell the passengers that we will not be making an emergency landing. We are continuing to Atlanta as scheduled." Karen smiled with relief. "Yes, Captain. Right away." As Karen walked back into the main cabin to make the announcement, Captain Stone realized he had learned an important lesson. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing up to difficult passengers and admitting when you had made a mistake. He also realized that he needed to learn more about service animals and disability rights. If he was going to be responsible for the safety and comfort of all passengers, he needed to understand the laws that protected people with disabilities. The airplane continued flying toward Atlanta, but Captain Stone knew that the most important part of this flight was still to come. He needed to make things right with Lucy, her family, and all the passengers who had been upset by his poor decision. Captain Stone picked up the intercom microphone with shaking hands. The whole airplane became quiet as passengers heard the crackling sound that meant an announcement was coming. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, he began. His voice sounded different than it had at the beginning of the flight. Now he sounded humble and sorry. I need to make an important announcement about our flight today. Earlier, I made a decision to make an emergency landing in Kansas City. I have changed my mind. We will continue flying directly to Atlanta as originally planned. The passengers listened carefully. Many of them were still standing in the aisles, waiting to hear what the captain would say about Lucy and Bruno. Captain, Stone took a deep breath before continuing. I also need to apologize to one of our passengers. Lucy Martinez is an 8-year-old girl who is traveling with her service dog Bruno. I made a mistake when I decided to remove them from our flight. I did not understand the law about service animals, and I did not think about how my decision would affect a little girl who needs her dog to stay safe. Helen felt tears of relief running down her cheeks. Lucy looked up at her grandmother with confusion, not fully understanding what was happening. Service dogs are not pets, Captain Stone continued. They are working animals that help people with disabilities live normal lives. Bruno is trained to detect when Lucy might have a seizure, which helps keep her safe. I should have understood this from the beginning. The airplane erupted in applause. Passengers clapped and cheered for several minutes. Some people whistled, and others called out words of support for Lucy and her family. Tony Garcia, the military veteran, shouted, "Thank you for doing the right thing, Captain." Lisa Park, the teacher, wiped tears from her eyes as she clapped. She was thinking about her disabled sister and how happy this news would make her. Even some of the flight attendants were clapping. Karen Mills felt proud of her captain for admitting his mistake and fixing it. Lucy looked around at all the happy faces and finally understood that Bruno would be staying with her. She hugged her dog tightly, and Bruno's tail wagged for the first time since the trouble had started. But Captain Stone was not finished with his announcement. I want everyone on this airplane to know that Lucy and Bruno are heroes. They have taught all of us something important today about courage, determination, and standing up for what is right. I am honored to have them as passengers on my flight. The applause started again, even louder than before. Dr. Ross smiled as she watched Lucy's face light up with happiness. She was proud that she had been able to help, but she was even more proud of Lucy for being so brave during such a scary situation. Frank Cooper, the businessman who had started all the trouble, sat quietly in his first-class seat. He was not clapping with the other passengers. Instead, he was thinking about what had happened and feeling ashamed of his behavior. As the flight continued toward Atlanta, something amazing happened. Passengers started coming up to Lucy's seat to meet her and Bruno. They wanted to learn more about service dogs and to tell Lucy how brave they thought she was. Patricia Lee brought her daughter Emma to meet Lucy properly. The two girls became fast friends, talking about their favorite colors and their pets at home. Jim Walsh, the retired lawyer, stopped by to give Helen his business card. "If you ever need legal help with disability rights issues, please call me," he said. "What happened today should never happen to any family." Even some of the first-class passengers came back to apologize for Frank Cooper's behavior. Robert and Mary Johnson brought Lucy a small toy airplane from the gift shop on board. "We bought this for you to remember your first airplane ride," Mary said sweetly. "We hope it will be a happy memory despite the scary parts." Dr. Ross spent time talking with Helen about Lucy's medical care. She gave Helen the names of some excellent epilepsy specialists in Atlanta and promised to call ahead to let them know about Lucy's case. "Bruno is doing such a good job with Lucy," Dr. Ross observed. "His training is excellent. How long did it take him to learn to detect her seizures?" Helen explained that Bruno had trained for almost 2 years before he came to live with their family. During that time, he learned to recognize the specific scent changes that happen before Lucy has a seizure. "The amazing thing is that he gets better at his job all the time," Helen said. "The longer he lives with Lucy, the more accurate his alerts become. Now he can sometimes warn us 30 minutes before a seizure happens." As if he knew they were talking about him, Bruno lifted his head and looked at Dr. Ross. His intelligent brown eyes seemed to say, "Thank you," for helping his family. About an hour before landing, something happened that proved just how important Bruno really was. Lucy had been feeling much better since the captain's announcement, but the stress of the earlier events was still affecting her body. Bruno suddenly became very alert. He sat up straight and moved closer to Lucy's seat. Then, he placed his head on Lucy's lap and looked up at her with intense focus. "Grandma Helen," Lucy said quietly, "Bruno is telling me something." Helen immediately recognized Bruno's alert behavior. She reached into her bag and pulled out Lucy's emergency medication. Dr. Ross, who was sitting nearby, came over to help. "And I so, she going to have a seizure?" Dr. Ross asked. "Probably," Helen replied. "But because Bruno warned us, we can get ready and give her medicine to make it shorter and less dangerous." Dr. Ross helped Helen position Lucy safely in her seat. They made sure she would not hit her head if she started shaking, and they prepared the medication that would help stop the seizure quickly. Several passengers watched quietly as Bruno continued his alert behavior. They could see how focused and professional he was. This was not just a pet. This was a highly trained medical professional doing his job. Lucy's seizure lasted only about 30 seconds, because they were prepared for it. Dr. Ross timed it carefully and monitored Lucy's breathing and heart rate. When it was over, Lucy was tired but perfectly safe. "You see?" Helen said to the passengers who had been watching. "This is why Bruno is so important. Without his warning, Lucy could have fallen out of her seat or hit her head. The seizure could have lasted much longer and been much more dangerous." The passengers were amazed by what they had witnessed. They finally understood why separating Lucy from Bruno would have been so cruel and dangerous. Frank Cooper had been watching from his first-class seat. Seeing Lucy's seizure and Bruno's response made him realize how wrong he had been. He felt terrible about the pain he had caused this little girl and her family. When the airplane landed in Atlanta, Captain Stone did something he had never done before. He left the cockpit and walked back through the airplane to personally escort Lucy and her family off the plane. "Lucy," he said, kneeling down to her level, "I want to apologize to you personally. I made a mistake today and I am very sorry that I scared you." Lucy looked at the captain with her big brown eyes. "It is okay," she said simply. "Bruno forgives you too." Captain Stone felt his heart melt. This little girl had more kindness and forgiveness than many adults he knew. As they walked off the airplane, Frank Cooper was waiting by the gate. He approached Helen nervously. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "I owe you and your granddaughter a huge apology. I was selfish and cruel today. I did not understand how important Bruno is to Lucy's health." Helen looked at Frank with surprise. She had not expected him to apologize. Frank continued, "I want to make this right. Please let me pay for your hotel and meals while you are in Atlanta, and I would like to make a donation to epilepsy research in Lucy's name." Helen was so surprised that she did not know what to say. Dr. Ross smiled and put her hand on Helen's shoulder. "That is very generous of you, Mr. Cooper," Dr. Ross said. "I think Lucy would be happy to know that something good came from this difficult day." 6 months later, Lucy received a letter in the mail. It was from Captain Stone, who had kept his promise to learn more about disability rights. He had become an advocate for service animal awareness and had helped his airline create new training programs for all their employees. The letter said that Lucy's story had been used to teach hundreds of pilots and flight attendants about the importance of service animals. Because of what happened on their flight, many other families with service dogs would be treated with respect and understanding. Lucy kept the letter in her bedroom, along with the toy airplane that Robert and Mary Johnson had given her. Sometimes, she would read the letter to Bruno and tell him that he was a hero. Bruno would wag his tail and give Lucy a gentle lick on her face. He did not need praise or recognition to do his job. All he needed was to stay close to Lucy and keep her safe, just like he had been trained to do. Their airplane adventure had started with fear and discrimination, but it ended with education, understanding, and positive change. Lucy had learned that standing up for what is right can be scary, but it is always worth it. And Bruno had proven once again that service dogs are not just pets. They are lifesavers, heroes, and the best friends a person could ever have.